Once, Reb Aryeh Leib of Polnoy was a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, and he loved to teach his congregation. And he wanted to learn the secret language of the birds, because he wanted to teach that to his congregation. And of course, the Baal Shem Tov was one of the few people who understood the language of the birds. So Reb Aryeh decided to go to his master and ask him to teach him the language of the birds. And so he went to Medsbush, and he went to the house of study of the Baal Shem Tov. But when he got there, he was surprised, because normally the Baal Shem Tov would greet him warmly and invite him in. But he not only didn't greet him warmly, he completely ignored him. And Reb Aryeh was very disappointed. But he thought, he's busy. I should be patient and not be so greedy for his attention. And so he was patient. He came back a couple of days later, but the same thing happened. He acted as if he wasn't even there. And a few days passed, and he came back again. And again, the Baal Shem Tov ignored him. And Reb Aryeh was just filled with longing. He felt so shut out from the attention of his master, and he longed to know the language of the birds. And he was about to leave when suddenly the Baal Shem Tov called for his driver, Alexei, and he called for his carriage, and all of the disciples, including Reb Aryeh, piled into the carriage and began to ride through the night. And eventually they stopped at an inn. Now the Baal Shem Tov went upstairs to a special chamber, and all of the Hasidim had to sleep on the floor, the bottom of the inn. And pretty soon, all of the disciples were asleep. They were all snoring. They were out on the floor. But not Reb Aryeh. He was restless. He was filled with longing, and he couldn't sleep. Now, before I tell you what happens to him, I have to tell you that I empathize with Reb Aryeh as a lover of birds and a seeker of enlightenment, and someone filled with longing to know more. Now, I've been a bird watcher for, about 8 or 10 years or so, and when I first discovered the world of birds, it was like finding a parallel universe that had always been there that I had never noticed. Suddenly, I was aware of this world full of brilliantly colored, feathered creatures that I'd never noticed before. And a couple of years ago, I started wanting and trying to learn the language of the birds. Now, on a physical level, what that means is that I was trying to learn to identify birds by their sounds. So I would take classes and listen to tapes or CDs of bird sounds. But on a deeper level, I really wanted to be connected to that mysterious language of flight that always seems just out of reach. Now, a couple of years ago, I was going on a trip to Portland. And just before I left, I threw in some CDs to listen to in the car on the way. And among them, I pulled out a CD of the bird sounds of the Pacific Northwest, because I figured I'd bone up, on them while I was driving along my trip. And so I got in the car, and along about Roseburg, I reached over with one hand and I pulled out the CD with the bird cover and I popped it in the CD player. And I was pretty much fully expecting to hear red-breasted nuthatch. Morning dove. Ooh, ooh, ooh. But I didn't. What I heard was Once Reb Aryeh Leib of Polnoi wanted to learn the language of the birds. Well, I just about pulled off the highway. I mean, here I was, right, on my way to Portland, where Reb Aryeh Leib Hirschfeld had lived, and he had died just a couple of months before that. And I hadn't been there yet. And of course, I don't know, most of you probably know that Reb Aryeh Hirschfeld was a huge lover of birds. He loved to watch birds, especially hawks and eagles. He liked to watch them soar and fly. His email was even "our bird." And here was suddenly I was hearing this story, and Reb Aryeh was a mentor to me in storytelling. He was always encouraging me and blessing me. You know, he was quite a blesser, and he would say, "Dora, you must continue with the stories, and may the stories flow into you and flow through you, and may you be a vessel for the big story." And he was always saying the great story, the big story. And I didn't have any idea, what did he mean by that, the big story? But suddenly this seemed kind of big. You know, I'm always saying that I don't pick stories, they picked me. And it seemed like this one had really made an effort to come through in my bird call tape, right? So I thought I'd better listen up. But what had happened actually was that I had pulled out a CD with a bird on the cover, and it was actually a CD that another storytelling friend had given me of bird stories from years ago, and it had somehow queued itself up to that story, and there it was. And from that moment on, I knew that that would be my story for the High Holy Days that year. And I also, from that moment on, the character of Reb Aryeh Leib of Polnoi was completely merged with the character of Aryeh Leib of Portland. So Reb Aryeh Leib of Polnoi lay on the floor of the inn, and he was restless. He couldn't sleep. And he could hear upstairs, he could hear the Baal Shem Tov rustling and stirring. He could hear him pacing back and forth. And before he knew it, Reb Aryeh was up off of the floor, and he was walking towards the stairs. And he could see at the top of the stairs a kind of light shining. And before he knew it, he was climbing up those stairs. And when he got to the top of the stairs, he could see that that light was flooding out of the Baal Shem Tov's chamber. And he crept closer and closer, and that light was blinding. The door was open, and suddenly the Baal Shem Tov turned, and he could see that the light was emanating from his master's face. And he stood there, blinded by that radiance, and he felt the full force of his longing to be in that light. And he couldn't say a word. But the Baal Shem Tov spoke. And he said, "I know why you've come, Aryeh. I know you want to learn the language of the birds. I didn't think you were ready for it, and that's why I ignored you. But come, I will teach it to you now." And he led Aryeh back out to the carriage. And he said, "I will teach it to you. But you must promise to pay careful, exact attention to every word that I say to you." And Reb Aryeh agreed. Now, my own quest for enlightenment via the language of the birds in this story had been moving along since the spring, and it was summer and coming up towards High Holy Days. And it was August, and David and I, to make a long story short, ended up in Italy. David was doing a wedding in Italy, and it was August. It was my birthday, and we were in Assisi. Assisi as in St. Francis of Assisi, as in St. Francis of Assisi, who also, besides the Baal Shem Tov, was one of the few people who knew the language of the birds. And it was my birthday, and I figured this was an omen. I felt like I was being guided, kind of like Reb Aryeh in the story. I was being guided, and I was getting ready for some kind of a revelation. And so I kind of prepped myself for this revelation, and I looked through the guidebooks, and I looked at the frescoes, and I looked up fresco number 34 on the bottom of the basilica. St. Francis gives his sermon to the birds. So I was ready. Now, in order to get to the basilica, you have to walk up a kind of hill, right? And it was 40 degrees centigrade, which translates to 104, it's August, right, in Italy, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And you walk with a big group of people who are, it's sort of like a sweaty pilgrimage up this hill, up to the basilica. So I made the pilgrimage, and you would think that when you get in there that it might be cooler because it's built, you know, it's made out of those thick stones, right? But you're wrong, because those thick stones, those heavy stones, have been storing up the heat all summer long. This is the end of the summer, right? So it's actually hotter when you get into the cathedral. And if you are sleeveless, which you are because it's 104 degrees outside, and if you're female, they give you a kind of paper poncho to cover your shoulders for modesty. And it's made out of the same kind of fabric that airline pillowcases are, so it's especially synthetic and made to hold in and exaggerate any heat that might have been there in the first place. So it's Assisi pilgrimage time. So I began to walk around the bottom part of the basilica. Now the really fancy, famous frescoes, the Giotto frescoes, are upstairs. But the ones that I wanted to look at least first were the earlier. Okay, and they're much more primitive, so they're in a very flat style. They're pre-Raphaelite or whatever. And I didn't want to go right to number 34. I was going to build up to it and go in the sequence. And these are so flat, they almost look Egyptian, right? There's no perspective or realism in them. And it looks as though in these frescoes that St. Francis from birth has been endowed with a kind of a halo that looks like a pie plate because it's so flat and ridged. And it's meant to symbolize, of course, his holiness, the halo, and so on, but it really looks like a pie plate, this round, ridged perfectly. So it's a little bit surreal. And then the frescoes depict scenes from his life, so it seems like from, you know, you see in all of these scenes, you see St. Francis in his crib, with St. Francis getting a revelation, St. Francis being anointed, but he does it with this kind of surreal pie plate riding over his head. And finally, I made my way all the way around the scenes of his life, and then it's kind of in a corner, sort of set apart, I finally stood in front of St. Francis gives his sermon to the birds. Now the Baal Shem Tov said to Reb Aryeh, listen carefully. Pay attention to every word that I say to you. And he began by explaining the divine chariot. And he said, the divine chariot has 4 symbols. There's a lion, an ox, a human, and an eagle. And the life force flows down to earth. The life force from the lion down to the wild animals, from the ox down to the domesticated animals, the life force from the human comes down to us, and the life force from the eagle flows through to the birds. And Reb Aryeh listened fascinated to every word and to every detail. And the Baal Shem Tov kept on explaining very intricate, complicated details. And he explained things from the Zohar and from the Tikkunim. And Reb Aryeh listened very, very carefully. And then all of a sudden, while he was listening, he became aware that the horses that were pulling the carriage were talking to each other, and he could understand what they said. And then a bird flew by, and another bird, and the birds were having a conversation, and he could fully understand what they said. But the Baal Shem Tov kept on talking and explaining, and Reb Aryeh listened to the Baal Shem Tov with one ear, but the other ear was swept away by the birds' song and conversation. But the Baal Shem Tov kept on talking and talking and talking, and finally, many hours later, he finished, and he said to Reb Aryeh, "Did you listen and understand every word that I said to you?" And Reb Aryeh said, "Yes." But it wasn't true. And the Baal Shem Tov waved his hand in front of Reb Aryeh's face, and he instantly forgot everything that the Baal Shem Tov had said. Now I stood in front of St. Francis gives his sermon to the birds. And it was another very flat fresco. There was St. Francis in his robes, right? Some trees, very pastoral, and some birds, little white birds. They were very flat. They looked like Disney cartoon birds. And at first I was just happy to be there, but then I really wanted a revelation. Sometimes I'm a little greedy for enlightenment, and that's not good. But there I was, and nothing was happening. But I waited. I'd come a long way to get there. And I stood there. And then all of a sudden, something shifted. It's kind of like those special painting books where they have pictures and you look at them and then you're supposed to blur your vision and you see what's underneath. Suddenly something shifted, my inner vision blurred or whatever, and all of a sudden I saw what was happening in that fresco. I saw that St. Francis wasn't giving a sermon to the birds. He was simply so tuned in, so completely tuned into the divine flow around him in the trees, in the grass, in the birds, that he was just experiencing all of it. He wasn't giving a sermon to the birds. He was simply right in the middle of the divine conversation. And all of a sudden, a ray of light came in from the window on the side, and that pie plate lit up like a halo. All right, I might have imagined that part. But I recognized that place of experiencing the divine flow. I've been there, sometimes deep in meditation, mostly out in nature, sometimes right here with the music and the dancing. But most of the time, I'm so preoccupied with my thoughts and my cravings that I don't experience it. And the world is just a flat fresco. Now the Baal Shem Tov waved his hand in front of Reb Aryeh's face, and he forgot everything that the Baal Shem Tov had said. And the Baal Shem Tov said, Aryeh, there's very few people who can really understand the language of the birds. It's very complicated. I only taught it to you to satisfy your craving, but you don't need to know it to serve God. You don't need to know it. The only thing you need to know, to understand, is Adonai Echad. Adonai Echad. So for us, again, the simplest, deepest lesson, God is oneness. God is all there is. It's all God. So in the midst of all of our cravings to know more, to understand more, to be more, all we have to do is bring our attention back to noticing the divine flow in everything. It's already there, right? It's already there. There is a language of the birds, but it's not complicated or mysterious. It's just part of the divine conversation. And we can walk right by it like a parallel universe, and sometimes we are locked out of it. But we have all the keys to open it. We know that right here. We can open it in prayer, in meditation, in dance, in song. We can open it just with our longing. We can open it by noticing the times when the pie plate shines like a halo, and when it fades, the ebb and the flow. So I went back and I wanted to find really what Reb Aryeh had said as a blessing, a storyteller's blessing. So I went back to a videotape, ancient technology, of my daughter's bat mitzvah some 16 years ago. And I fast-forwarded it. Instantly it came up, of course, because he wanted to say this to you too. And there he was giving me a blessing. And he said, you know, and he would always like channel, right? And he said, may the stories flow through you. May you be strong and be a vessel. And this is for all of us. May you do all of the work that you need to do on every level, and then let go for the big story to come through. And so may we all, this weekend, getting ready for Purim, may we all do all the inner work that we need to do on every level, and then let go and spend some time in the divine flow. And in the merit of Reb Aryeh of Polnoy and Reb Aryeh Hirschfeld, may we all know the language of the birds.